this really necessary?
Yeah, I kinda think it is. They say the price of loyalty is always changing, and I think mine just went up a bit. I'm Euclidean Vision, and I'm disappointed with Storm Rising. Let's fix it, shall we? In 3, 2, 1.
Da 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 da. Hi.
How's it going, y'all? Now, just to clarify, Storm Rising is fine. There's certainly fun to be had, and Blizzard has kind of knocked it out of the park with certain aspects of this event, but there's some pretty clear flaws I want to address, and hopefully offer some solutions for the future. A big thanks to all the nebulous realms of the internet whose influences helped build on this idea with me. It is pretty clear to me that despite its issues, a lot of us want to see Overwatch be the best it can be. So what have Blizzard done well with Storm Rising that they can continue to develop on in future? The cutscenes and the animation are easily their best in-game work yet, brilliantly directed and fluidly animated. The map itself works for both the event and the standard game modes seemingly. It's pretty expansive, it's really detailed, it's a really pretty map. The music for the event, especially on the third point, is personally really nice. It's got some sick little modulations in there that I really enjoy. And Maximilien, at least for what they were going for, they kind of nailed the personality, the mannerisms, and Stefan Kornikar really brings just the right amount of sinister to Maximilien's voice. It's really well done. I really enjoyed him for what he was. But that's about it. That's about all the praise I genuinely have. So, what went wrong and what could we do to fix it? So starting with sort of this perspective of the event, the third event in a row that's from the perspective of Overwatch as a whole is somewhat expected, somewhat not. We kind of thought that we were going to get progression from Overwatch towards Talon with this third mission, especially as the middle mission was Blackwatch, sort of a crossing point if you will. And that kind of starts to really show in this event that Overwatch doesn't have many characters, and playing consistently as just Overwatch could get a little stale if it keeps happening. The repeated heroes for this event, 3 out of the 4 playable heroes are repeated from past events, and that definitely doesn't scream new and improved. For the mission at hand, there aren't many available heroes. The only characters we know who really would have been able to go on this mission would have been Soldier 76, so the big man himself. That would have been interesting to see. Or Sojourn, who maybe... Why didn't you release her just before the event instead of the other guy that you didn't make use of? Just a question. And then if you had those 2 characters who could also possibly have gone, why did we just have to have the 4 at hand? Could we not have chosen from a team of 6 and narrowed down to 4 characters so you've gotten a choice? Then that could add at least some gameplay variety for replayability and for the people who've experienced all the events so far and want to see something a bit different, want to see the event improve on previous missions. And as I sort of brought this up, where was our Talon mission? We kind of need to see a bit more from Talon's point of view. This mission expanded them a bit, but to the extent that a Talon mission would have done, don't think so. Talon are still feeling a little underwhelming as a presence in the world thus far, and this mission kind of really hasn't done that any favours when it was, oh, we'll try and catch Max. Oh, we caught Max. That was easy. So how about expanding on some of the story moments that we do have? Maybe like retelling some of those, like some of the moments from the comics or from the animated shorts. If we could have special brawls that were recreations of those game modes. Yeah, they'd be sort of non-canon to an extent because you could have differing fail and pass states, but so cool. Mess around with it, play with what you've got there and develop on it instead of just making up new stuff all the time, which is a point that will come up again as we move into the story. What could we have done with the story that would have improved Storm Rising? Well, for a start, a comic would have been nice. Some stakes, a genuine moral dilemma, personal investment of the characters to the mission. Most all the character interactions in this mission are just about the mission. When we could have had like an actual present antagonist, like Maximilien could have been utilised a hell of a lot more to even just flesh out this event some more, or the feeling of the story, or the sense that we were constantly on his tail. even just having more of an understanding of him, if he managed to hack into the radio and started just taunting us as we go through the mission. Sojourn gets interrupted, if she was interrupted. There's no reason why they couldn't have used that to show more of Maximilien's character and cement him a bit more as an actual villain and create some stakes and some character interaction and relationship there. Even just sort of more like scope of what he could do or the threat that he could pose presented in some way would have been a hell of a lot more interesting than he's in the cutscene at the beginning and we get to the end and oh, he's escaping. So we kind of needed a clearer impact and a more relevant resolution. What we got was Maximilien set up the meeting between Overwatch and Doomfist, which means Maximilien set Doomfist up to be arrested. Okay, fine. And what? The only thing that annoys me about this is that it kind of doesn't correlate with Maximilien and Doomfist's relationship to each other in the present day, the conversations they've had, the way they seem to respect each other, and Doomfist doesn't know that Maximilien sold him out, potentially. Did Maximilien sell him out? Was this all planned by them? There's multiple things you can take from it or speculate on, but all we actually got from this event was something that we already kind of knew. Or we knew that the end result would be the same regardless. Then again, that's kind of disappointing. Could we have done something more with that? Could we have made Maximilien more impactful? Could we have made Maximilien's capture more actually impactful? Could it have meant something to the characters in Overwatch rather than, we're going after Talon, we need Maximilien, we just need to do it. So hopefully that raises the point that this event kind of lacks a bit of depth. As I said, there's very little relation between the antagonist and our characters. There's very little in terms of stakes or a moral dilemma associated with capturing them and stuff as well. Like with Antonio, there was at least a huge moral dilemma about killing him, whereas this mission it's, nope, we're just capturing this guy. No matter which way you spin it, it doesn't feel like it has any impact to me. And then the ending kind of annoys me because it feels like Reunion, where Reunion was an excuse of an animated short that was used to tease the release of Echo. Whereas now they've made an entire event whose culmination is a teaser for another future hero who we know nothing about. So that's two new Omnics who we know basically nothing about, except that one's good and one's evil. Great. How about developing on the existing characters that you had more first? Definitely don't use them as stepping stones to further unknown new characters, like, lest everything feels shallow. Like, a good supporting cast is great, man, like, but Maximilien, personally, is a character who's very, almost wasted in the support cast, compared to, at least, the potential for what we've been unveiled to have. A possible Null Sector / the Iris Omnic activist, who has very clear motivations and alignments, whereas Maximilien has vocally stated to be, like, acting against his own kind on the side of the Omnic crisis, or at least is perpetuating such, which is already far more nuanced than the supposed character that we've been teased at the end of Storm Rising. Doomfist's conversation with the new Omnic is basically the same conversation that him and Max had in the casino in Masquerade about respecting Vision and trying to progress the Omnic crisis. It's literally the same conversation, except the one in Masquerade was more interesting because Maximilien was willing to act against his own kind. That's a more nuanced, interesting character. Why Overwatch is a member of what is very maybe a member of your supporting cast, why are they more fleshed out and more nuanced than the characters you're trying to get us hyped for? Bit of a wasted opportunity, don't you think? So as I brought up the new Omnic, and their possible links to either the Iris or Null Sector, given their colouring, let's think about how we could have improved the game mode with some new enemies, at least, even not new enemies. Why didn't we reuse the Uprising enemies, the Slicers, the Null Troopers, the Eradicators, and the Detonators? All four of those could have been brought into Storm Rising to fight alongside Talon as either their Null Sector variants to give us a clue that the guy at the end, oh, he's with Null Sector, they've teamed up, sweet. Or could have they just have had Talon paint jobs, and that suggests a bit more that Maximilien, as an Omnic, is happy to use both human and Omnic servants to do his bidding, like, again, just adds a bit to his character. As we got the Guishin Bastion skin, what if they'd been Guishin variants? What a way to develop a huge piece of in-world lore with just an enemy skin. A Guishin Bastion in this event would have taught us that Talon have connections to the Guishin, without saying anything, without doing anything. If there was Null Sector, Tracer and Mercy would have had their bit to say. But that's there. It's such easy, emergent storytelling that you kind of missed out on, guys. Sorry. Use the stuff that you've got there at present to help develop what you're going to do in the future. That new Omnic probably could have maybe used a hint or so that would have improved the gameplay by miles. And as mentioned, whoever this new Omnic is tied to, Null Sector or the Iris, most likely Null Sector given their circumstances, tying them to Talon, and very possibly Maximilien. As Maximilien mentioned, he has many associates, and is in the market for making introductions. Did Maximilien introduce the new Omnic to Talon? So is he possibly actually even more involved with the progress of the Omnic crisis than we would have thought? Again, a tiny thing that would have told us so much and would have improved the characters that we already had. So now to move on to some more original ideas, or slightly original. As I mentioned, the Guishin, instead of having Guishin Bastion, how about adding a new unit and giving us something from one of the cinematics, the Guishin Tentaculons, or what, the Sentinel things, like from the Matrix. What if we could have had something like that? That would have been a crazy enemy to fight, like a floating laser beam enemy. That would have been nuts. As Maximilien apparently owns the Rumbotico distillery. How about some workers, some Omnic workers from the distillery who throw Molotov bottles of rum? So Molotov throwers who could work sort of like Ash's dynamite, or they could throw an area of flame on the ground to sort of act as like area denial. And again, this just ties a bit further into developing Max's character, that he's even got his workers either mind controlled or controlled with money, to the extent where even the people at his rum factory will pick up a bottle of rum, set it on fire and throw it at you if they have to. And now we move into like proper Talon enemies, because again, we only had the 5 signature Talon enemies in this event, which really dragged it down when there was so much expectation for this event to improve on the last one. Having all these new units was great last time. Using just them this time was definitely a letdown. So let's think up some new Talon units. A Talon Grenadier, for instance. Unit maybe we'd say a pistol, so some lower general fire, but that can throw grenades, or maybe flashbangs, or smoke grenades, make them a bit of a mix and match. Maybe give them dynamite and give them a single shot rifle, if you've ever seen that idea anywhere before. Or how about Talon Pistolier, who uses a heavy damage long range pistol, or has dual wield pistols and some increased mobility compared to the other Talon units. Talon Riot Control, that uses a riot shield and a shock baton. Yeah, that might sound a little familiar as well. A Talon Shock Trooper, this one should sound familiar from the Recall cinematic. So it could use something like a shock tether to do damage over time and like a slow to any enemy they hit with the projectile tether. Again, you could sort of break that with melee to give it a little bit of its own individual counter. What about a Talon Officer, who has either a damage boost link or a speed aura, something to assist the other troops? Or an Omnic Master, a Talon unit that either controls drones or places turrets or spawns Omnics to assist in the fight. And a last sort of idea tying back a bit more to some of the Omnic ideas, how about like a shield generator on wheels? The detonators from Uprising are a quite strange unit in that they serve a single purpose. Why not have a unit like that that's got loads of health and just generates shields for all the enemies in its AoE? Simple thing, but it really changes how you'd go about fighting some of these enemies. How about a Barrier Caster? A unit that purely casts barrier bubbles onto nearby allies as it fights you. So that could be a Talon unit, that could be a Null Sector unit, similar to the shield generator on wheels I mentioned. And now a lot of these might start sounding familiar. Let's make them even more familiar. Talon, again, maybe don't feel as impactful or as scary as they really should. How about using an event to reveal that Talon have access to way more in-world tech than we knew at first? So a unit I've called the Talon Phaser, a failed experiment with the slipstream technology, forming high mobility units not anchored to the present by a chronal accelerator, creating a sort of glitchy, crazed tracer analog to fight against. So as we're doing analogs of characters present, how about a Talon Cyborg? Talon can totally make cyborgs, why not? Have a melee-focused Genji counterpart, for instance, that dashes everywhere and strikes with a sword or arm blades, so like a variation on the assassin. Something I've called the Talon Stalker. Why haven't we got a unit that has a link to Moira's smoke powers? To reveal Moira's connection more deeply and to show how the experiment maybe has only worked properly in Moira and Reaper's cases. A Talon mech unit. Why are mecha the only people in the world who have mechs? Why don't Talon have a mech, like a stripped back Diva analogue? Talon aerial assault, basically Pharah, but probably just not as good some way. Like, a lot of these units that you can make for Talon, you can make out of things that we have in-game, that you then maybe like reduce the power of a little, or just swap around how some of the things work, mix and match existing mechanics to just make a new unit. That shouldn't be like too hard. That's how they've made new characters in the past. So to build on that a bit more, Talon Bob? Like a berserker form of the heavy assault that does way more charges and a knock up? Or how about we mod the heavy assault? Like instead of just the Gatling guns it has, what about cannons? So it's got a low fire rate but heavy single instance damage. Or something that reduces its range, like a Tesla cannon or a flamethrower, or beams, so there's less counterplay with deflect. You could give them close range like blade arms if we're going to go really close in, or we could give them like bashing shields so they can act as defense and offense simultaneously, then they can be a real tank. That could be pretty interesting. Hey, if we're talking tanks, how about a Talon Moon Monkey? Ungayan is very possibly a Talon agent who was also on Horizon Lunar Colony during the genetic experiments. Could Talon get hold of a specimen from Horizon Lunar Colony and train it to be their genetically enhanced battle monkey? They sure could. Max will use anything. Introducing a lot of these units, again, highlights Maximilien More as a character, makes him feel more threatening, more imposing, more resourceful, that he would use all of these different kinds of things. Like maybe even the vehicles from the opening. Well, why haven't we got those as like a version of an enemy as we've seen the characters interact with them? How about like a ramming tank that charges across the screen? Again, sort of like the Bob idea. Well, what about gun emplacements that heavily armoured and enemies can jump in it to use a heavier gun than they would usually use? How about using those dropships as like gunships or smaller versions as drones, so we've got some more aerial assault to deal with? And finally, the one that I'm sure you've noticed I've been skipping over mentioning just yet, a combat medic. And fuck just giving us a combat medic, why wasn't Talon Baptiste in Storm Rising? Because he should have been. Whether as just a regular unit, like a Talon combat medic, because they have combat medics apparently, or what about sort of like a mini boss, where Baptiste shows up a few times throughout the level to heal up any enemies you've been fighting, and maybe he uses his immortality field to escape, something like that. You just introduced like a perfect character to make an enemy healer off, and you just didn't do it. And that's not the only one. There's other characters from the game who very logically could actually have been there themselves, not just as replica units. What about Ashe? The Deadlock Gang had links to Talon for who knows how long. What if to make the arms deal with Talon, Ashe had to be Max's freelance bodyguard for a few months, and that just happened to coincide with this event? Ashe isn't going to care about who she has to fight to get a deal done. That'd be sweet. And as we've seen enemies from Uprising return, why not have the proper characters from Uprising return and have a Null Sector Bastion, a Null Sector OR-14? What about a Blade OR-14, like from Honor and Glory? What about Max having pet Bastions? What about one in the Stealth skin, one in the Grishin skin, one in his Origin skin, another Bastion found out in the wilderness? Expand on what you've got. There was so much there to play with, and you could have had mini boss battles with each of these characters. You could have teamed them up for a big boss battle at the end. Someone like Sombra or Moira, especially Sombra, could just have been there as Max's personal guard. Sombra especially is an agent of Talon. She's not in the High Council. She would be essentially, especially at the point that we're at in Storm Rising, she would be subject to Max's whim, really. Imagine Sombra just popping up continually throughout the mission, hacking you every now and again and disappearing, just to be pesky. Like, Retribution suffered from this, in that we didn't have a Sombra and a Doomfist boss battle in the year that they got Talon skins. Again, why give us these skins when you're not gonna just stick them in the event? It's there. It's there to be used. Why aren't you doing it? How about suggesting some other characters that we haven't seen yet? What if suddenly, amid the mission, as we hear Max over the radio, for instance, call out for assistance, and suddenly a giant hard light barrier erects across like the whole map? So we get the hint of, maybe he called in a favour from Sanjay, for instance. We don't have to know who it was or why, but it'd just be a nice little tie to increase the world building and add just like a very different circumstance to the event, make the fight interesting. And as we're getting into just random thoughts, what about using the storm? There's a massive storm going on, especially on the third point of the map. Why not make use of that? There's just random AoEs detonating across the map that affect both your team and the AI enemies, so if you can be clever about how you direct it, you can really make use of it, and it can also screw you over. Just be an interesting environmental hazard, for instance. And so I sort of deviated away from this a little to try and highlight how important this could all make Maximilien seem, and how it could develop his character and could make us all a bit more associated with the event itself. Let's take that a step further. Why wasn't there a boss battle? As I mentioned, the extra characters that we could have had as boss battles. How about Maximilien himself? But maybe not him. What about if he used clones or replica Omnics that were engineered to look like Maximilien, that were either like suicide fakes that would run at you when you encountered them and then exploded, so you'd think you'd caught up to Max and then you just suddenly die? Or what if his mouth were to open and he starts shooting lasers out of it? Or what if you come across a Maximilien and it's actually an assassin and you just get pounced? What if we were to have a copy of Maximilien, his personal bodyguard, that was like Recluse? Imagine Maximilien suddenly growing massive spider legs, looking like Ultron, and shooting laser beams out of his mouth. Ugh. That would be really fun. That'd be great. And it still doesn't even have to be Maximilien himself. For a guy to have made copies of himself and to have made one like a death machine is impressive, right? And if we're going with this clone idea, that chunk where we were stuck in the distillery, the second point, how about making like a collective boss search battle puzzle, where wherever you go as you're fighting enemies, you'll notice a Maximilien. And if you jump to the Maximilien and it then explodes, you found a fake, another one turns into a laser turret, but then another one actually takes damage and runs away, and maybe you found the actual Maximilien, or maybe he gets to disappear somehow, or another character comes in to save him, for instance. Or how about you use those special minions to break up each section, have like a multi-stage minion boss at the end of each one that can then maybe conglomerate for like a full team battle at the end, which could consist of like an Orisa, a Bastion, a Baptiste, and maybe an Ashe, or maybe Maximilien himself, or one of his replicas. And if we're going with Maximilien himself, I do have a hero concept for Maximilien, the Magnetic Maverick, where he utilizes magnetism to act as a tank. And go check that out. I hope you like that. I think it's probably better than what Blizzard gave us. It would have been more fun anyway. So I think that's about all I can offer in terms of specifics. There's a few maybe like little alterations to how the game is played that I think could be really interesting to explore as well. Maybe like certain timed sections, like the end of the Storm Rising mission could have been timed to represent Maximilien actually getting away and us maybe not being able to catch up to him. For the second section, in the distillery, how about if we had to gather the explosives from around the area before we were able to progress? What if you were able to use the mobility, the high mobility that the characters in this event have, to do some sort of puzzles, whether they're just there to block progress forward or whether they're there to give certain advantages or change the landscape? You could do plenty of things with the characters we have to try and make progressing more interesting than kill the bad guys. So what about like multiple weighted floor tiles at different elevations that different characters would be able to access with their mobility options, pushing you to explore the map and find the bit that fits best for your character to allow you all to proceed? You could do the same sort of thing with multiple levers, like in some of the Call of Duty Zombies, where you have to press levers in a quick sequence that's determined at random once the sequence is started, to maybe escape the warehouse early or just to progress all told, while fighting off enemies, etc. Again, with the platforms idea, could we maybe have weighted platforms that require a certain amount of characters to stand on certain ones for some puzzling and some balance idea? Could there be buttons that interact with, say, blinks and dashes to press multiple buttons at the same time with a single character? All of this is sort of just pushing towards the idea of using our character's abilities for more than just combat, largely for sort of keys to doors, if you will. So say there's a Tesla coil that is needed to charge an electronic door or raise a platform. Winston's Tesla cannon will come in handy. Maybe there's a wall you need to push through, or a drawbridge you need to knock down to get into the C4. How about Primal Rage, or even just Winston's Leap? What if the exit to the distillery was held by a chain, and you were to find that there was a rusted bit that you could only hit with, say, Genji's dash? Or say a laser puzzle where you have to use his deflect to reflect a light between mirrors, for instance. Maybe there's a specific breakable wall, or an objective, like something that needs to be destroyed, that you can only use Pulse Bomb to deal the final blow as it's then blown up, if you will. And possibly if you were to come across any NPCs, using Mercy's healing would maybe yield some extra benefits like the way forward, or just some information about what's to come maybe. So all told, I think that would be really interesting to add sort of accessing new or specific areas only being possible via movement abilities, and maybe making like more of a destructible environment for both progress and for hazards, so we really get more of a feel of like a platformer out of the mobility options that we have present for such a mobile team that Storm Rising features. And finally, if we were to do something like the opening section, like riding the bike, and Winston, Mercy and Genji had to cause like a blockade and intercept the cars before we go after Maximilien, that would have been pretty cool, right? I mean, it would have been nice, but it might be asking a bit too much. That is the only one that I think is asking a bit too much. Everything else I think is genuinely relatively possible with the technology that they have at present. And I'm kind of disappointed to see them not really capitalise on both the story elements and the gameplay elements that they had there and they just didn't use, personally. They're saving them for the future, cool, but is that worth this sort of detriment in the short term? Not sure. On the whole, I'm glad to at least see Blizzard still releasing lore events, obviously. But if they want to keep their playbase interested and coming back, they're going to need to step up their game. The price of loyalty is always changing, after all. Hopefully some of what I've put forward today is actually useful in helping that along, though. Feel free to use it, Blizzard. You're welcome. And you, dear viewer, are also always welcome here with me, Euclidean Vision. I hope you've enjoyed your time with me today, and see you again very soon. If you did enjoy today's video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel to help a grumpy, dissatisfied little weeb out. And so go in peace, my friends. May the glorious light of Best Girl shine within you. Goodbye.